Kneel down. Victoria Sterling's voice was a weapon. It sliced through the quiet elegance of the restaurant. 200 pairs of eyes snapped toward us. She stood rigid, a queen demanding tribute. Her diamond bracelet flashed, a cold fire as she pointed a long, manicured finger at me. Then on the floor. I said, she repeated, her voice lower now, more dangerous. Kneel down. Apologize for ruining my $20,000 dress. I stood perfectly still. My fingers gripped a white cloth napkin. It was the only thing in the world that was trembling. A few drops of red wine gleamed on the marble floor. They were the only evidence of the lie she had just performed. The staged stumble, the theatrical gasp, the perfectly timed outrage. None of it was real, but the malice in her eyes was. The entire room held its breath. They were waiting for me to break. No. The word was sharp. It cut through the suffocating silence. Victoria Sterling had no idea what she had just done. She thought she was humiliating a waitress. She had no idea she had just awakened a monster. The air vibrated. Her face flushed a deep, ugly red. Her expensive makeup couldn't hide the rage building beneath her skin. She stepped closer. Her designer heels clicked on the marble. It sounded like a countdown to war. Excuse me. Her voice dropped to a whisper. It was a sound designed to carry, to intimidate. Did you just tell me no? The other diners pretended to eat, but their eyes were on us. This was their dinner theater, a live performance of cruelty, and I was the star. I said no, Mrs. Sterling. My voice was steady. My heart hammered against my ribs. A trapped bird wanting out. I had seen it all. The way she angled her body, the deliberate tilt of her wine glass. It was a carefully choreographed dance of hate. I will not kneel down. I will not apologize for something I didn't do. Victoria's mouth fell open. Real shock for a split second. In her world of private jets and gated communities, the word no was a foreign language. She blinked, her mind recalibrating. The shock turned back into fury. How dare you? Her shriek made the crystal chandeliers tremble. Do you know who I am? My husband owns half this city. She looked around for an ally. She found one. David Thompson, the restaurant manager, scurried over. He was a well-trained dog eager to please his wealthy masters. He was a thin, nervous man. He had perfected the art of kissing up and kicking down. His eyes darted between me and Victoria. He was calculating his odds. The answer was obvious. Mrs. Sterling, I am so terribly sorry, he stammered. He wrung his hands. He turned to me. His face was filled with disgust. Rose, what have you done now? The question was a verdict. It assumed I was guilty. This wasn't the first time. It assumed a woman like me was born for trouble. I had worked at this restaurant for 8 months. I had never had a single complaint. My professionalism earned me more in tips than servers with twice my experience. But none of that mattered. It was her word against mine. I suggest you apologize immediately, Thompson continued. His voice dripped with false authority. Mrs. Sterling is one of our most valued customers. His loyalty had a price tag. Victoria had already paid it. I won't apologize for something I didn't do, I repeated. My voice grew stronger. My mother's hospital bills were a mountain, $30,000 and climbing. The beeping of the machines was the soundtrack of my life. Borrowed time. But even desperation has its limits. This job was my lifeline. But some prices are too high. If you fire me for telling the truth, I said, then so be it. The words tasted like freedom and terror. I was walking a tightrope over a canyon of financial ruin, but I would walk it with my head held high. Victoria's fury melted into a cruel, twisted smile. This was even better than she had hoped. Not just an apology, complete and utter destruction. Fire her, she laughed. The sound was like breaking glass. Oh no, firing is too good for her. I want her to understand her place. She began to circle me, a predator sizing up her prey. Her voice projected to every corner of the room. You people need to learn respect. You need to understand there are consequences for stepping out of line. The coded words hung in the air. You people. Phones started to emerge from purses and pockets. Small red lights blinked in the dim light. They were capturing every second. I could see the headlines tomorrow. The viral video. The waitress who forgot her place. The comments would be a torrent of poison. The judgment would be swift and merciless. But something profound inside me refused to break. I could hear my mother's voice, weak but proud. Dignity can't be bought or sold, baby girl. I could feel my grandfather's ghost at my shoulder. He had faced down men far worse than Victoria Sterling. My place, I said quietly, is not on my knees. Victoria's face contorted. Your place is wherever I say it is. I know the mayor, the police chief. I know the head of every major business in this city. One phone call and you'll never work in this town again. She snapped her fingers. The sound was sharp like a whip crack. The threat was a poison gas seeping into the room. The other servers froze. Their faces were pale. They had all heard the stories, the powerful crushing the powerless. It was the first rule of survival in the service industry. Keep your head down, smile. Never ever fight back. Thompson seized his moment. He was a career survivor. Rose, you're suspended. Immediately, clean out your locker and leave the premises. His voice was filled with the grim satisfaction of a man who had chosen the winning side. Security will escort you out. 2 large guards appeared. They were part of the performance. A final layer of humiliation. The other staff averted their eyes. They were ashamed of their own fear but unwilling to risk their own jobs. Solidarity was a luxury they couldn't afford. Rent was due every month. Principals didn't pay the bills. Victoria smiled, a triumphant, vicious smile. She was already savoring her victory. This story would be an amusing anecdote at her next charity luncheon, a cautionary tale. As the guards approached, I clutched the white napkin tighter. Hidden in its folds was a secret, an embroidered reminder of who I really was. Dr. Auntie Rose, MBA. Stitched in delicate thread, a hidden weapon, waiting for the right moment. I looked directly into Victoria Sterling's cold blue eyes, and for a split second I let her see it. Not defeat, calculation, not submission, strategy. This isn't over, I said quietly. The words were a promise. Her smile faltered for just a heartbeat. The guards flanked me. I walked toward the exit. I held my head high. The whispers followed me, a cowardly tide. Behind me, I left a room full of people who thought they had just witnessed destruction. They had no idea they had just watched the first move in a game Victoria Sterling didn't even know she was playing. The rain drummed against the windows of my small apartment. I sat across from my mother at the kitchen table. Dorothy Rose looked fragile. Her faded pink robe hung on her frame. The chemotherapy had stolen 30 pounds from her, but her eyes still held the fire of a woman who had raised her daughter never to back down. Tell me what happened, baby, she said. Her hand squeezed mine. Her fingers felt like bird bones. I told her everything. Her expression shifted. Concern, pride, quiet fury. That woman, Dorothy said finally. She thinks she can break you. Because of your skin. Because of your uniform. She doesn't know who she's dealing with, does she? A smile crossed her weathered face. It held secrets. The secrets of a mother who had sacrificed everything. No, Mama, I said. She doesn't. I pulled out my laptop. It was the same one that carried me through 2 years at Harvard Business School, before reality forced me into a server's uniform. My fingers moved across the keyboard. Muscle memory. I once commanded spreadsheets and financial models, not dinner plates and wine orders. Victoria Sterling thinks she knows everything, I murmured. She's about to learn that assumptions can be dangerous. The screen glowed. Search engines gave up their secrets. Society pages, charity event photos, business registrations, property records. Every digital crumb the Sterling family had ever left was about to be put under a microscope. Information was power. I had spent years learning how to utilize it effectively. The first hour of research was predictable. A portrait of old money excess, country club memberships, political donations, enough charity galas to fund a small country's health care. But I dug deeper. The pristine facade of the Sterling empire began to show cracks. Richard Sterling's construction company. City regulators had flagged it 3 times in the past year. Permit violations. Whispers on business forums spoke of delayed payments to subcontractors. 2 civil suits had been quietly settled out of court. Interesting, I murmured. I copied links. I built a digital file. My old professors would have been impressed. The pattern was subtle, but it was there. A company is bleeding money, but it was desperately maintaining the appearance of wealth. These were classic signs of financial distress, wrapped in designer clothes and million-dollar smiles. My phone buzzed. A text from Jessica Martinez, my old study partner from Harvard. She was a senior auditor now at a top firm. Asterisk girl, I saw the video. Are you okay? Asterisk. A link followed the message. Strangers were already dissecting the confrontation on social media. My stomach clenched. I read the comments. Some were supportive, others were vicious. All of them missed the point. I typed back quickly. Asterisk, I'm fine. Question for you. What do you know about Sterling Enterprises? Asterisk. The response was a phone call. It came within minutes. It would change everything. Imani, honey, you need to be very careful. Jessica's voice was low, urgent. Sterling Enterprises is under investigation by the SEC. I can't say more over the phone, but there are irregularities in their quarterly reports. They would make your finance professors weep. The next morning, I woke up to a text message. My suspension had been upgraded to termination. It was cowardly. It was expected. David Thompson couldn't even fire me in person. He hid behind corporate policy. As I deleted the message, another notification appeared. A news alert. Sterling Enterprises stock had dropped 12% in after-hours trading. The timing was not a coincidence. Someone was dumping shares. Smart money was running for the exit. They knew a scandal was about to break. I screenshotted the article. Another piece of the puzzle. The shape was becoming clear. That afternoon, Victoria Sterling swept into the restaurant. A conquering general, she requested my old section. She made a show of examining the wine list. She told her lunch companions that she had embellished stories about the night before. Some people simply don't understand their place, Victoria proclaimed, loudly, loud enough for the entire dining room to hear. But I taught that little waitress a lesson she won't soon forget. The other servers moved with careful precision. They knew they were being watched. Management had made it clear. Any sympathy for me would result in immediate termination. Fear was a powerful tool. Victoria wielded it like a master. But her victory tour was about to hit a snag. As she pontificated about respect and social order, she didn't notice the woman in the business suit, sitting 2 tables away taking careful notes and recording every word on her phone. I had returned, not as a server, as a customer. I had used my emergency credit card, a meal I couldn't afford, clothes that transformed me, from service worker to professional. The transformation was stunning. The same woman who was dismissed as nothing yesterday now commanded respect. Appearance was everything. I was learning to play the game. Victoria's voice rose. Her claims grew more grandiose. Her influence, her power. And then she said something that made my pulse quicken. References to offshore accounts. Mentions of temporary relocations of assets. Knowing winks about flexible interpretations of tax law. She spoke with the confidence of someone who believed she was untouchable. Victoria Sterling was confessing to financial crimes. In a room full of witnesses, recorded on a device that would preserve every incriminating word. The irony was perfect. The same arrogance that led her to humiliate me was now providing the evidence to destroy her. I smiled. I saved the recording. Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. The game had begun. Victoria Sterling had no idea she was already losing. 3 days later, I found myself standing outside the restaurant again. I was wearing my old server uniform. It was a calculated risk. It could get me the information I needed, or it could get me a trespassing charge. I had called in a favor. Maria Santos, one of the few servers brave enough to stay in contact, had agreed. She let me work a private catering shift for Victoria's intimate dinner party. The invitation was exclusive. 12 of the city's most powerful people gathered in the private dining room. The invitation was cryptic: mutually beneficial investment opportunities. I adjusted my name tag. I checked my hidden recording device one last time. Tonight, I will gather the final evidence. The evidence needed to dismantle an empire built on corruption, an empire built on cruelty, one recorded confession at a time. The private dining room buzzed with low, dangerous conversation. This was the sound of people who believed they were safe from consequences. Victoria was at the head of the table, a queen on her throne. She wore a midnight blue Valentino gown. It costs more than my annual salary. The beauty of international banking, she was saying as I refilled water glasses. I moved with practiced invisibility. A ghost in black and white is that money becomes wonderfully fluid. Numbers can dance between accounts, like ballet dancers, appearing here, disappearing there, always in motion. The men around the table chuckled. Their wives nodded with knowing smiles. The smiles of people who had spent years looking the other way. They did not ask uncomfortable questions, not about the source of their comfort. I caught fragments of conversation, words that could end careers. Richard Sterling, Victoria's husband, was discussing shell companies. He spoke with the enthusiasm of an artist describing his masterpiece. The key is layering, he explained. He gestured with a crystal tumbler of 30-year-old scotch. Company A owns Company B. Company B has partnerships with Company C. By the time anyone tries to trace the ownership, the paper trail leads to a P.O. box in the Cayman Islands. The casual admission of tax evasion hung in the air, like expensive perfume, overwhelming, obvious, and completely ignored by everyone, except for the woman serving their wine. Victoria's voice cut through the murmur of criminal confessions. Speaking of fluid arrangements, she announced, Richard and I have decided it's time to diversify our portfolio. Geographically, some of our more liquid assets will be taking an extended vacation in Switzerland, at least until this unfortunate SEC investigation resolves itself. She said it with a casual shrug, the confidence of someone who believes rules are for other people. The guests nodded. Several pulled out their phones, presumably to make similar arrangements for their own assets. My hands were steady. I served the next course. My mind was racing. Victoria Sterling had just confessed. Obstruction of justice, money laundering, in front of a dozen witnesses. The conversation grew even more reckless. Richard Sterling's voice held a note of frustration. He described his company's regulatory problems. These inspector types think they're so clever, but they don't understand. Construction is a relationship business. Sometimes you need to encourage certain relationships to flourish. His meaning was clear. Bribery. It was as common in their circle as charity galas and yacht parties. Victoria laughed. She raised her wine glass in a mock toast to creative problem-solving and flexible interpretations of bureaucratic guidelines. The glasses clinked, a symphony of complicity. But Victoria's triumph was about to be cut short. I leaned over to refill her wine glass. She glanced up. Recognition flickered in her eyes. "Wait a minute," she said slowly. Her voice cut through the chatter like a blade. "I know you. You're that waitress from the other night, the one who was so rude to me." The room fell silent. All eyes were on me. I was trapped in the spotlight. My cover was blown, but the recording device in my pocket had already captured enough to destroy every person at this table. The only question now was whether I could escape before Victoria's fury turned into something more dangerous than just humiliation. "Security!" Victoria's shriek shattered the elegant atmosphere. "This woman is trespassing." She was fired. "She's here to cause trouble." The guests murmured. Some reached for their phones. Others demanded explanations. Richard Sterling's face drained of color. He understood the implications. A former employee, with a clear grievance, had been listening to their private business discussions. Paranoia spread through the room like a virus. How much had she heard? What did she know? What was she planning to do with it? I backed toward the service entrance. 2 security guards appeared from the shadows. Their faces were grim. "I was just helping Maria with the catering," I said calmly. My voice carried clearly across the room. "Though I have to say, this has been quite an educational evening. I've learned so much about creative accounting." The subtle threat was not lost on Victoria. Her composure cracked. Fury tightened her jaw. Fear widened her eyes. For the first time in her privileged life, Victoria Sterling was afraid. "Get her out of here. Immediately," she commanded, but her voice held a note of panic. "And I want her arrested. For trespassing, industrial espionage, whatever we can charge her with." The guards moved toward me, but I was already at the service door. My hand was on the handle. Freedom was seconds away. I turned back. One final look. A room full of criminals in designer clothes. I memorized their faces, their voices. They would soon be explaining themselves to federal investigators. "Thank you for a lovely evening," I said with perfect politeness. The words were a promise and a threat. "I look forward to seeing you all again very soon." The service door closed behind me. I could hear Victoria screaming and demanding that they find me and retrieve my recording equipment, but it was too late. The evidence was already beyond her reach. Copied, secured, ready. Victoria Sterling had underestimated her opponent one last time. This time the mistake would cost her everything. The information was gathered. The confessions were recorded. Justice was no longer a hope. It was inevitable. The law office of Marcus Washington was on the 15th floor. Its windows offered a commanding view of the city. A city that had tried to break both of us. Marcus was a man who understood the fight. He knew what it was like to go against systems designed to crush people like us. His Harvard law degree hung next to photos of civil rights leaders. His reputation for taking down white-collar criminals had earned him both respect and enemies. "Miss Rose," he said. He studied the flash drive I had placed on his mahogany desk, a chess piece in a high-stakes game. "What you've brought me could change everything, but I need you to understand the risk." His voice was heavy. He had seen too many David versus Goliath battles end in tragedy. I leaned forward. My posture radiated a determination born from having nothing left to lose. "Mr. Washington, I've already lost my job, my reputation, and nearly my dignity. Victoria Sterling wants to ruin my life because I refused to kneel. The question isn't whether I'm willing to take risks. It's whether I'm going to let her get away with crimes that would put ordinary people in prison for decades." I gestured toward the flash drive. Hours of recorded confessions. These people think they're untouchable. They've never faced consequences. It's time someone showed them the law applies to everyone, regardless of their offshore accounts. Marcus picked up the flash drive. He turned it over in his hands. He was weighing its power against the retaliation it would provoke. "I've been investigating financial crimes for 12 years. People like the Sterlings don't fight fair. They'll use every resource to tear apart anyone who threatens them." He walked to the window. He gazed down at the city. Justice was supposed to be blind, but it often seemed to need glasses when looking at the wealthy. quickly. 3 years ago, Victoria Sterling ended the career of a young black prosecutor. He was getting too close to her husband's business. She had him investigated, leaked false stories to the press, made sure he never worked in law again. Then why are you willing to help me? I asked. I suspected I already knew the answer. Marcus turned back. I saw old pain in his eyes, mixed with a newer, sharper rage. Because Victoria Sterling made a mistake last month. She decided to humiliate me at the mayor's charity auction. His voice took on an edge that could cut glass. She stood up in front of 500 people. She suggested that lawyers like me weren't qualified to handle real cases involving serious money. The memory still burned. As Marcus played the recordings, his expression changed. Professional interest turned into barely contained excitement. Richard Sterling's voice filled the office, casually describing money laundering. Victoria's laughter echoed as she toasted their creative interpretation of tax law. "This is incredible," Marcus whispered. He paused the recording to make notes. "We have conspiracy to commit tax evasion, obstruction of justice, money laundering, and what sounds like systematic bribery of city officials. Any one of these charges could break them. Together, this is a federal prosecutor's dream." The evidence was locked. It was ready. Marcus began outlining their strategy. "A general plan's an attack. We'll need to coordinate with federal authorities. However, we must be cautious about timing. The Sterlings are planning to move assets offshore. We need to act fast." He pulled up financial databases on his computer, cross-referencing shell companies and banking records. "The information from my recordings was the key. I've been building a network of other victims over the years, people whose careers were destroyed by the Sterlings. With your evidence, we can finally give them the justice they've been denied." The scope of the corruption was staggering, a web of ruined lives stretching back decades. Our planning was interrupted. His secretary knocked urgently on the door. "Mr. Washington, there are 2 men in the lobby. They claim to be private investigators. They're asking questions about Miss Rose." The message was clear. Victoria's retaliation had already begun, faster than we had anticipated. Marcus and I exchanged a look. We both understood the danger. "They're being very polite," the secretary added, "but very persistent. They mentioned something about industrial espionage." The legal battle was now personal. Marcus moved quickly. He made multiple copies of the flash drive. "We need to file with federal authorities immediately, before the Sterlings can claim the recordings were obtained illegally. I'll reach out to my contacts at the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. They've been looking for a way to crack the Sterling organization for years." He handed me a secure phone, a business card for a safe house service. "From this moment on, assume you're being watched. Don't go home. Don't contact anyone, and don't trust anyone except me and the federal agents I'm about to introduce you to." As I prepared to leave, Marcus delivered one final piece of information. "There's something else you should know. Victoria Sterling's pattern of eliminating black professionals. It's not random. She's part of a coordinated effort to maintain what she calls appropriate demographic balance in positions of influence." He showed me a folder. 23 cases, over the past decade, systematically targeted. "You're not just fighting for yourself, Imani. You're fighting for every person whose life she's deliberately ruined because of the color of their skin." I slipped out into the night. My phone buzzed. A text message made my blood run cold. "From the hospital. Urgent." My mother had taken a turn for the worse. Her immune system was failing. The doctors were recommending emergency surgery. It would cost $50,000. Money I didn't have. Money I couldn't get. The alliance was formed. The legal machinery was in motion. But the cruelest test of my resolve had just begun. The hospital corridor smelled of disinfectant and desperation. I stood outside my mother's room. I clutched the doctor's estimate. $50,000. Could have been 50 million. Dorothy Rose lay connected to a web of machines. They beeped out the rhythm of a life hanging by a thread. Her hands, once so strong, were as fragile as autumn leaves against the stark white sheet. "The infection is aggressive," the doctor explained. His voice was careful, practiced, the tone reserved for delivering impossible news. "Without immediate intervention, her immune system won't be able to fight it off. The surgery is her only chance." The words hung in the air. A death sentence wrapped in medical terms. 3 days later, I returned to the restaurant. I was wearing the uniform again. It felt like a costume from a nightmare. David Thompson had called personally. His voice dripped with false sympathy. He offered me my old job back. Reduced hours, lower pay. "Mrs. Sterling specifically requested you be given a second chance," he had said. The lie was so transparent that it was an insult to the intelligence. "She believes in redemption." The truth was more straightforward, more sinister. Victoria wanted her enemy close where she could be watched, self-controlled. I accepted the humiliation. My mother's life depended on it. Pride was a luxury I could no longer afford. Not when measured against the steady, relentless beep of a life support machine. Victoria's birthday party was an obscene display of excess. The restaurant's main dining room has transformed. 50 of the city's most influential people, worshipping at the altar of wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbows across tables laden with caviar and truffles. Wine that costs more per bottle than a family's weekly groceries. Victoria held court. She was radiant in a custom Versace gown, a liquid gold. "Tonight," she announced, "we celebrate another year of knowing exactly where we all belong." In the natural order of things, I moved through the crowd, an invisible ghost, serving champagne to people who looked right through me. Victoria's voice carried across the room. Her eyes found me with predatory precision. "Some people in this city have forgotten their place recently. They've developed ideas above their station, thinking they can challenge those who were born to lead." The crowd murmured their agreement. Phones discreetly emerged, ready to capture another viral moment of humiliation. "But I believe in teaching lessons," she continued. Her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Lessons that stick." The torment escalated. Each insult was a calculated blow, designed to break what was left of my spirit. She demanded I personally serve every course at her table. Maximum visibility for my subjugation. "My dear friends," Victoria announced during the main course, "I want you to meet someone special. This is Auntie, a perfect example of how second chances can teach valuable lessons about knowing one's place." The words were patronizing, the tone used for a trained animal performing a trick. "Tell everyone what you've learned, Auntie. Share your newfound wisdom." It was a command disguised as a suggestion. I stood frozen. 50 pairs of expectant eyes were on me. The weight of their judgment was a physical force. My mother's face flashed in my mind, fighting for every breath, while I stood here, paraded like a trophy of submission. The hospital bills were a mountain. The surgery couldn't wait. This job was the only thing keeping her alive. Every instinct screamed at me, "Fight back, reveal everything." But the beeping of those machines echoed in my memory. It drowned out the voice of rebellion. "I've learned," I began, my voice a whisper, "that everyone has their place in this world." The crowd leaned in. They sensed victory. They were eager to witness my complete collapse. Victoria's smile widened. She savored every word. But as I continued, my voice began to change. It grew stronger. Tears threatened to spill down my cheeks, but my words were firm. "I've learned that some people believe they can buy respect, that money can purchase the right to humiliate others without consequence." My hand moved to my pocket, the embroidered napkin, a talisman against my heart. "I've learned that there are people in this room who think their wealth makes them untouchable, that their crimes will never see the light of day, because they can buy silence and intimidate witnesses." The temperature in the room dropped. The implications of my words began to sink in. Victoria's triumphant expression faltered. Her moment of victory was transforming into something else. "That's enough," she snapped. Her voice was a whip crack. "You're here to serve, not to lecture your betters." But I was no longer listening. The breaking point had been reached. The balance of power had shifted. "You're right, Mrs. Sterling," I said. My voice now carried to every corner of the room. "I am here to serve, but not in the way you think." I pulled out my phone. My fingers danced across the screen. "I'm here to serve justice, and it's about to be delivered, hot and fresh." The room erupted. Victoria's face cycled through confusion, anger, and finally a cold, stark fear. The fear of someone who has fatally underestimated their opponent. "Security!" she screamed, but her voice was drowned out by a new sound. "My phone is connected to the restaurant's sound system." Marcus Washington's voice filled the room. Professional, reading from a federal warrant. The party was over. The real show was about to begin. Marcus Washington's voice was the sound of a world coming to an end. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Attorney Marcus Washington, representing the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Financial Crimes Division. We have credible evidence of money laundering and conspiracy to defraud the United States government involving several individuals present at this gathering." The champagne-soaked atmosphere evaporated. Guests frantically reached for their phones, calling lawyers and calculating their own exposure. Victoria stood frozen. Her perfect makeup couldn't hide the terror spreading across her face, like spilled wine on white silk. The federal investigation had moved with military precision. Once Marcus delivered my recordings, FBI forensic accountants worked nonstop for 72 hours. They traced the digital breadcrumbs of the Sterling financial empire. A maze of shell companies, offshore accounts, fraudulent transactions spanning 3 continents. Agent Sarah Chin, the lead investigator, had called it the most comprehensive white-collar criminal organization she'd seen in 15 years. "These people didn't just bend the rules," she had told Marcus. They created their own financial system, designed to avoid taxes, hide assets, and launder money on an industrial scale. The documentation was overwhelming. Richard Sterling's construction company had systematically overcharged the city for public works projects. At the same time, it is also bribing inspectors to overlook safety violations and putting countless workers at risk. Victoria had used her network of charities as fronts, skimming donations intended for homeless shelters and children's hospitals. To fund their lavish lifestyle, they had transferred over $200 million to accounts in the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, and Luxembourg. A complex web of fake companies, Global Wellness Solutions, International Humanitarian Partners. The names were a sick joke. Each transaction was crafted to avoid detection, but human analysis revealed the precise pattern of criminal intent. My financial analysis skills have been invaluable. 3 sleepless nights, creating spreadsheets and flowcharts, tracing every dollar from its illegal source to its hidden destination, building a case so comprehensive that even the most expensive defense attorneys would struggle to create reasonable doubt. The beauty of financial crimes, I had explained to Marcus, is that criminals always leave a paper trail. They can't help themselves. They need documentation to keep track of their own lives. My analysis identified 17 separate violations of federal banking laws. Each carried potential prison sentences that could add up to life. But as the federal case gained momentum, Victoria had launched her own desperate counterattack. Private investigators followed me and Marcus, photographing our meetings and trying to uncover information. Anonymous tips were called into the FBI, claiming the recordings were fabricated, planted by a disgruntled former employee seeking revenge. Victoria had even contacted the hospital where my mother was being treated and suggested that our financial difficulties might make us susceptible to bribes. The psychological warfare was relentless, designed to erode my willpower before the case could reach trial. She wants you to break, Marcus had warned me. She's betting the strain will force you to make a mistake, or simply give up. But what she doesn't understand is that every attack she makes creates more documentation of obstruction of justice. The final piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source. Victoria's own accountant. He had been quietly documenting his client's illegal activities for years. An insurance policy against potential legal trouble. Harold Brennan had worked for the Sterlings for over a decade. When FBI agents appeared at his office with a search warrant, he handed over boxes of documents. They corroborated every detail of my analysis. I've been waiting for someone to finally investigate these people, he told Agent Chen. What they've been doing isn't just illegal. It's an insult to everyone who pays their taxes and follows the law. The paper trail was now complete, irrefutable. A mountain of financial documents, recorded confessions, and witness testimony. The Sterling family had built their empire on lies, theft, and the suffering of others. As news of the investigation began to leak, Victoria made one final desperate move. Through intermediaries, she offered me $100,000 to recant my testimony, to admit the recordings were fabricated. The offer came with veiled threats about my mother's medical care and promises of ongoing payments that could solve all of her health problems permanently. Think about what really matters, the message had said. Your mother's life is worth more than some abstract concept of justice. My response was swift and ambiguous. Justice wasn't abstract, not when it meant preventing other families from being destroyed. The web they had built to hide their crimes was now pulling them under. The handcuffs would soon click shut on wrists more accustomed to diamond bracelets. Back in the dining room, the chaos mounted. Marcus's recorded voice gave way to Richard Sterling's. The guests listened in horror to their friend casually describing his crimes. The key is layering. The paper trail leads to a post office box in the Cayman Islands. Victoria's laugh echoed through the speakers. A ghost from a dinner party just days ago, toasting creative interpretations of tax law. Some of our more liquid assets will be taking an extended vacation in Switzerland until this unfortunate SEC investigation resolves itself. The timing was perfect. The context was undeniable. The implications were staggering. I stood at the podium, a prosecutor delivering her closing argument. My voice was calm and professional. I methodically dismantled the facade of respectability. Over $200 million have been stolen, I announced. My words carried to every corner of the room, to the television cameras broadcasting live. Stolen from charities intended to help sick children, homeless families, and disaster victims. Financial charts and transaction records appeared on the projection screens. Each document was another nail in the coffin of Victoria's public image. Money donated by ordinary citizens was diverted to offshore accounts, used to purchase yachts and mansions, while children suffered in underfunded hospitals. The chandeliers flickered, then the main doors burst open. FBI agents flooded in. Their badges gleamed under the crystal light, medals of justice finally arriving. Agent Sarah Chin led the charge. Her voice cut through the chaos. "Victoria Sterling, you are under arrest. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit money laundering, tax evasion, and fraud against charitable organizations." The cold snap of steel handcuffs replaced the soft clink of jewelry. Victoria's perfectly applied makeup began to run. Tears of rage and disbelief streaked down her cheeks. Cameras captured every moment of the millionaire's descent into disgrace. As federal agents led her away, her composure was utterly shattered. The woman who commanded respect through fear was reduced to sobbing pleas for mercy. They were brushed aside. "You don't understand," she cried. She looked back at me. Her eyes were wide with a desperation that bordered on madness. "I gave you a chance. I offered you money." Her voice rose to a shriek. It echoed off the ballroom walls, the cry of a wounded, cornered animal. But I stood unmoved. My expression was calm. I watched justice finally catch up with someone who had believed herself untouchable for far too long. The same humiliation she had forced on others now returned to her, with interest. The guests, her powerful friends, froze in place. They began to file out, their faces pale. Many were already calculating their own exposure to the federal investigation that would surely follow. In the silence that followed the chaos, I remained at the podium. I looked out over the wreckage. What was once an impenetrable fortress of wealth was now a ruin. The woman who had been dismissed as just another server had proven that knowledge was the ultimate equalizer. That truth could topple a dynasty built on deceit. In the end, justice stood taller than wealth. 6 months later, the federal courthouse buzzed with reporters. The final act of the Sterling drama was about to unfold. Judge Margaret Thompson's gavel echoed through the packed courtroom. She delivered sentences that would reshape how white-collar crime was prosecuted in America. "Victoria Sterling, you are hereby sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, without the possibility of parole." The judge's voice carried the weight of justice that had been long delayed. "Richard Sterling, you are sentenced to 20 years in federal prison for your role as the architect of this criminal enterprise." The couple who once commanded cities now sat in orange jumpsuits. Their empire was ashes. Their future was measured in decades behind bars. The forfeiture hearing that followed was just as devastating. Federal prosecutors had traced every stolen dollar. They recovered $200 million in cash, property, and investments. The money would be distributed to the charities and victims who had suffered under their reign of greed. The Sterling Mansion, their collection of luxury cars, the yacht Victoria was named untouchable. All seized. The very wealth they had used to corrupt and silence others was now funding the justice system that brought them down. I stood on the courthouse steps. No longer an invisible waitress. I was the whistleblower whose courage had exposed decades of corruption. The settlement check in my briefcase was for $2 million. Compensation for lost wages and emotional distress. But it was more than money. It was validation. The fight had been worth the cost. My mother's medical bills were a distant memory. Her cancer treatment was complete, successful. The financial security I had fought for had saved her life. The machines that once beeped out the rhythm of borrowed time now sat silent in a storage room. My own life was transformed. Rose Financial Consulting occupied a gleaming office in the heart of downtown. Our mission statement was etched in gold on the lobby wall. Empowering communities through financial justice. We specialize in helping minority-owned businesses. We provided free services to families struggling with medical debt and predatory lenders. My team of analysts worked with the same precision that brought down the Sterlings. But now our skills were used to build up, not tear down. Lejardin also underwent a dramatic transformation. David Thompson's termination had been swift and permanent. The new management had offered me a position as a financial consultant and tasked me with ensuring fair compensation and advancement. The servers who once feared speaking out now worked in an environment where their voices were heard. My mother's recovery was miraculous. She spent her days volunteering at a community center and teaching literacy classes. My daughter showed this city that intelligence and determination matter more than birthright and bank accounts. She would tell anyone who would listen. She proved that justice isn't just a word in a law book. It's something worth fighting for. On a quiet Tuesday evening, I returned to Lejardin, not as an employee, not as a consultant, but as a customer, celebrating my mother's clean bill of health. I wore the same Navy business suit from the night I exposed the conspiracy. In my purse I carried the white napkin, embroidered with Dr. Imani Rose, MBA. It was no longer a hidden reminder. It was a trophy, a a symbol of a battle won against impossible odds. The server who brought our wine was a young black woman. Her posture was confident, her demeanor was professional. She moved with the assurance of someone who knew her worth, an opportunity created by the changes my courage had unleashed. As my mother and I raised our glasses, I reflected on the journey we had taken. A toast to survival, a toast to justice. The woman who had once feared for her mother's life now sat in the same dining room where Victoria Sterling had tried to break her spirit. But Victoria was gone, her influence a ghost, and in her place stood a new generation. A generation that understood true power comes not from wealth or status, but from the courage to stand up for what is right.